Hello and welcome to episode number 4 of the Manasquan Brielle Locals Only podcast for August 14th, 2025. This is your hosts, Sean Waltman and Casey Terzis, and we have a very special guest, but before you introduce yourself, I have to play this. All right, just kidding, Mike. We have a very special guest tonight. We have the Mayor of Manasquan, Mr. Mike Mangan. Mike, thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I'm really glad I get to be here. This is awesome.
Yeah. Mike, as we typically do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to mayor, but before that, how did you get to Manasquan and the whole story?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the condensed version, right? Because no one wants to hear the whole story. But the short version is that I was born here. And it turns out, my connection to being mayor now, that's really relevant, and it'll come up, because one of the things that I talked about quite a bit as, whether it was when I was campaigning or I talk about all the time now as mayor, is the fact that I am one of the people who was born here. And, going back to when I was a kid and an early teenager, being born born in Manasquan was a very big deal. And, some would say it still is. But I can tell you firsthand that kind of has faded a lot compared to what it was when I was a kid. But I was born here. So when, my first house was on Rogers Avenue, my parents were renting there. They met. My father was a bouncer at the Osprey and a lifeguard. My mom was here from the summer. She grew up in Point Pleasant. My dad, my grandparents moved here in the 60s. I think it was the late 60s, early 70s, with a whole generation of North Jersey blue-collar families. And, my grandfather was a pressman for the New York Times. He was a union pressman. And my grandmother was a private school teacher. So she taught Catholic school, not ever for long durations, meaning she would teach for a few years somewhere, and then inevitably she would raise a kid. So whether it was her own kid or then it was the grandkids, my grandmother was always raising kids. And so they had a house on East Virginia Avenue in Manasquan. And when my parents divorced when I was 2, my mother and I moved in, and my sister, to that house. And so we kind of made it a duplex. It certainly wasn't, but we tried to have them have their own area, and we had our own area. My mother was a school teacher at the high school. So it was, she was a single parent at that point as a school teacher, especially even back then, school teachers were not making anything. So that was, we moved in out of necessity at that point. But it gave me this experience of being kind of raised by my grandmother. And I was born in 1984. And from 1980 to 1989, my grandmother was on the Manasquan Town Council. And so I literally remember going into Borough Hall when I was a kid with my cousins, or most often me, because I was living there. And the clerk's office had taken to putting a bowl of candy out for us. And so we would go in, and I would be just thrilled to go to Borough Hall and get some candy. That is a tradition, by the way, that survives today because I remain in government. So if you ever go to Borough Hall, there is a basket of candy there, and the staff rags on me because I take some every time I go in. So, but that's how long I've been here. That's how long. And the only, I think, other relevant point of my story, to my life today, especially as it relates to being mayor, is I didn't go to high school here. So a lot of people, I went to elementary school, and I didn't go to middle school here either. So I said my parents had split. There was a lot of family stuff going on at the time. So I spent most of my childhood here, and every summer, and I went to Manasquan Elementary up through the middle of 5th grade. But the middle of 5th grade, there was a lot of stuff going on in the family, so I moved up to Oceanport where my dad was, and I went to middle school up there. Then from there, I got accepted to MAST, the Marine Academy of Science and Technology, and I actually wanted to play football for Manasquan. I had played football for sure because that's where my dad was and he was a coach. So I played Pop Warner for sure. So when it came to high school sports, I would still want to play football. And at the time, high schools were allowed to choose whether or not you would accept students on a sports level from the sending district. Now that's not the case. They have to accept you and they have to make accommodations. But back then they could choose. and Manasquan said, we're not accepting athletes from Mass because it's too far away. You would get here too late at practice and you couldn't be a meaningful, participant. And so that was their rule. So I couldn't play for them. So I played for Shore. So I was the, starting center for Shore, which is a surprising part of my background to a lot of people, is that I played football, and I find it coming around full circle because now I'm coaching it, AYF, which has turned out to be one of the great joys of my life. But yeah, so I've been here since forever, and my family's been here since my grandparents. So the roots are pretty deep.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of that bygone era where it was a lot of folks were coming from North Jersey and blue collar, and it was affordable, and it was different town. I want to get back to that. So thanks, awesome for the intro. I mean, I want to get back to the story. I don't want to get back to that time period. Casey's shaking his head at me. But anyway, I was saying that awesome for the intro. What we typically do is after the intro, we want to go a little bit round robin about the past week. So Casey, you've been quiet. What's been going on the past week in your life?
Work. No, just a lot of work. I only had a 3-day work week this week because I had trainings today and I have a training tomorrow. So fitting, 30 clients in a 3-day span, it was just working 9 to 9. So busy days. And then football at night, helping out with the AYF as well on Mike's team here. So
yeah, it's exciting to see you practice. It's cool.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, we definitely should talk about AYF. That should be something we talk about. Yeah, not much on my side except also work. Yuck. Sunday scaries, big time. Going back after 3 weeks off, which was quite the luxury. And it was definitely hard to get back this week. I have a little bit more vacation planned. This storm coming in, Hurricane Aaron, is kind of throwing a wrench in a couple of things. For those of you that are watching it, we should be okay. I don't expect any direct hits or anything like that, but we're going to have some gnarly surf. I'm seeing 70-foot waves at the center and, 9 to 10 foot for us. So just a, perennial reminder, swim near a lifeguard. If there's red flags, do not swim. It's going to be rough. But yeah, so Mike, going back to that. So you had, grandparents in town. You came for a little bit. We always kind of hear like, oh, are you local? Did you go to Manasquan High School?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I got kind of a pass for that because my mom was a teacher there. Yeah. So and everyone either loved or feared my mother, and that was definitely a cross to bear growing up around here because she was a really tough English teacher, and so I would experience people went, wait, you're Mrs. Mangan's kid? And I was like, yeah, sorry, that would happen a lot. But I also got to see the other side of that, and I mean this, because it happened a lot where people would say, hey, your mother challenged me, and it changed my life, and that really did happen to me a lot. So I realized then that, there's a certain balance to being tough and fair that connects with certain kids. And I was one of those kids that connected with. So, and I think that's why I connected with football. Because I always felt like, the coach will scream at you, but, there was a moment in the back of your brain where you realize you did something wrong, right? And so it was a teachable moment. And so, I'm not saying my mom was screaming at kids. That's probably or maybe she was, I don't know. But, similar. She was very firm. And so, if you got a C, it's because you deserve a C, right? And years later, the kids would admit that, right? And they'd say, yeah, well, she gave me a fair grade. So
yeah, and a little bit less sensitivity at that point in time, and yeah, you learned a lesson. Mm-hmm. Learned a lesson from that. So you're the mayor now, but you didn't start there, and you mentioned being in government for a long time. So tell us the whole history there, how you got started back in town here.
Yeah. So I mean, I got started in my interest in politics, obviously, since I was a kid. But when I graduated college, I didn't go to college for politics. I went to school in D.C., but I was adamant that if I was going to be in any way associated with politics, I wanted to study something else. So I studied communication, which is not communications, but communication is a degree that not every university has, and it's the study of human interactions. So it's sociology, anthropology, psychology. I didn't know what it was when I got into it, but I have found that as I got older and as I got into more of what I'm doing in town, that I'm relying more and more on what I learned back then as a person to understand how people communicate and how important that is to getting a message across, right? Because communicating successfully is something that I think is not discussed a lot. and the miscommunication is so big, and the stakes of what I do. Like, let's be clear, right? Mayor of Manasquan, I'm not the governor, right? You played Hail to the Chief, that's funny, but like but the stakes are high here. I feel that way, right? Because the people expect, and so when the stakes are high, you have to be sure. You just have to make sure that you kind of always have your wits about you, and I think that's keep your feet on the ground, and it's an important. It helps with that.
Yeah, and you're pretty good, actually really good, in the sense that a lot of people in politics will be very short with their answers. You take the time to actually expand and explain your situation and your opinions on everything like that, which I think is very helpful, whether it's in the co-star or if it's on Facebook. Like, you're pretty good with that. That's a different thing. Well,
thank you. I mean, to a fault to my colleagues, right? I've been doing this for a long time. I have the distinct honor of being both Manasquan's youngest elected official, both today, but also in history. I was elected in council at 22. And today, I am its longest serving elected official in my 19th year. So it's been I've had quite the perspective. Having been born here, having lived not here for a time, having went to school away from here, having a business that's based in New York, all of these things contribute to, and again, that communication degree, contribute to trying to understand people and meet them where they are. Combine that with the fact that I'm just an old school government nerd, and I genuinely love talking about this stuff. Because I got into government to answer a lot of why questions. I was a curious kid, and I wanted to know how and why things worked. And what I found out was the deeper I dug, most of the times, especially if something didn't make sense on its face, I would find that there was an answer in government as to why it was that thing was done that way. And so it attracted me to it because I went, oh, so this is kind of how we run things. This is what we do here in America. This is how we do this. And a ton of it happens at the local level. So even though I may have had dreams one day of getting involved at a higher level, I started my professional career, working in politics. I got out 4 years in. It was a great experience, but I ran away from that industry. And I stayed in local elected office because it's totally different. This isn't like professional politics. It has elements of it, but this is really about community service and about communication and about getting people on the same page and getting people to work together. And I love that stuff. So,
Mike, Sean and I at 22 were hanging out at Leggett's and the Parker House. What makes a 22-year-old right out of college want to get on the town council?
If I'm being honest, at the time I had bigger dreams. I was on my way to what I thought was either Congress or some higher elected office. It's what I surrounded myself with people like that. By the way, great people. I worked professionally in politics. That's how I met my wife. Mm-hmm. So that came out of that experience, which is amazing. And the friendships that I made in that business, I still have today. And what is kind of cool, I guess, is a lot of those people stayed in government and did accelerate their careers. And so as a result, I have some really old friends that we spent nights in the bar that are now in very high places in government in New Jersey. And it has really, quite frankly, has benefited Manasquan tremendously because I'm able to lean on those relationships when, offshore wind was a good example. When we needed offshore wind, we needed the state to come down here and explain themselves about transmission. There were people who were terrified, rightfully so, about what was going on. And the Board of Public Utilities was doing their typical thing of being non-responsive, generally speaking, right? Well, I used my title and a friend to get an audience with the board of directors of the Board of Public Utilities, or it was the staff, like the senior staff. And we get on this Zoom call, and I didn't know who we were meeting with other than it was the Board of Public Utilities. And we get on the Zoom call, and then the last box to join in on the bottom right is this guy Joe, who I've known for 20 years. And I literally go, Joe? And he goes, Mike? And I was like, you're at BPU? And he's like, yeah, the governor just appointed me last week. And I'm like, dude, I need your help. And he's like, okay, what do you need? I said, I need you to come down here and explain yourselves. Okay, you guys missed a step. I don't care whether you're for or against offshore wind, because I know they're all for it, and I was against it, and I wasn't going to go there because I'd never convince them. But what I was able to convince them of was that they did it wrong. Was if you guys are so sure of your position, then get out here and explain yourself. You should be sure enough to come down here and give these people the explanation that they deserve. If you think it's safe, get down here and say how it's safe. And then they did. They hosted that big meeting. And I'm not saying it won everyone over, but I will say there was a huge group of people in the center who were there for information, who were thrilled with the information that they got. And ultimately, I'm hopeful that it's going to die. But at the time, what I asked them for was, we need information, and they gave it to us. So those relationships that I still have today I'm bringing them to bear because I want to fund a whole bunch of projects too.
Yeah, 100%. Similar story. It is that connection that you have. When I finally moved back here, we were trying to go to the beach, and I was like, man, there's no crosswalks between Manasquan and Union Lane in Brielle. And so I'm like, I got to solve this. I'm going to go to the town council meeting, and I made like these big posters. I did this big like GIS analysis, like look at all the families, and they have to go all this way. And I went up to the council meeting, and they're like, that was a great presentation, but that's Route 71. We don't control that road. You have to talk to the state DOT. And so I send in this like just anonymous, not anonymous, with my name on it, and Scott, this guy I knew from high school, reaches back out to me, and he was at DOT. He was like, I haven't heard of you in 15 years. It's like, yeah, we could look at that. And we got the crosswalk on Park Avenue. So sometimes those connections that you make in politics early in life really do matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, they do. And that experience, the breadth of the experience that I had in politics today, it hardened me too to the way the system is done. I mean, when I say I ran out of there, it's because I understood exactly what was going on. My career was accelerating fast. I could have had almost any job I wanted in politics. I loved it. I was really good at it. But what I realized was that the system was completely broken, and that whether it was Republicans or Democrats, what I saw were good people on both sides working towards what they thought was the right answer for the people, genuinely, like that these people genuinely want to do this. But that what they didn't realize is that it was never going to happen, that the system that they found themselves in needed such transformational change, still does, that it didn't really matter who was going to be at the higher levels, and that really the only change that we could make at this point was at the local level. And I made that determination 20 years ago, and I feel even stronger about it today.
Yeah, and you've been committed to it while still doing a full-time job, right? You're not a highly paid mayor of Manasquan.
$5,000 a year.
Okay.
I do take it. Unlike Trump, I do take the $5,000.
And what do you do in the rest of the day?
So I have an athletic flooring company, which I started in 2016. We started out in New York City, like I said, which was there's a long story as to how I ended up there. Long story short, a company out of Wisconsin took a chance on me at 32 years old, and they gave me New York City as a territory to build a company with. And now I am their sole dealer there, and I share all of New England, and I'm about to jump into Maryland, DC, Virginia. But this all operates out of Manasquan. My office is across the street from Borough Hall and around the corner from my house. And my office is proudly staffed by a majority Manasquan graduate, high school local kids. My sales team are local Manasquan grads. My operation team, some of the best and brightest out of this, come out of this area. And I'm really, really blessed to have the team that I have, because without them, I couldn't be mayor. And these guys are on board. My team, my work team. Again, I say they're high school grads, they're locals. It matters because they care about the work I'm doing. And so when I say I have to go over to Borough Hall, they make it work. So I couldn't do it without my team. But my company occupies a lot of my time and a lot of my mind. But the town is, I'll just say this, the mayor's job is a lot more than I thought it was going to be, which is surprising to say for someone who's been in government as long as I have. You think I would have known. But I think there's also something to the way that I'm coming at the job. I come at it full on. So it's a lot, but I'm enjoying it.
And you've delegated quite a bit. You've started a lot of commissions. Mm-hmm. Like that seems to be a very clear pattern of what you're doing. Yeah,
delegating is a challenging way, is the idea, is the perfect, right, is the ideal. But what you realize when you're working with a bunch of people who, and we kind of just briefly talked about this before we started here tonight, about people who don't spend their lives focused on government. And they come to the table with a lot of passion and a lot of ideas and love to see all of that work in coordination. But you've experienced it. I know you both have experienced it. Probably anyone listening has experienced it. What happens in government is you get tripped up on process. You get tripped up on how do you get this stuff from conception to reality. And I realized a long time ago that was the trick to successful government, was getting an idea from conception to reality. And so, what you see in Manasquan, some of the changes, especially in the last year and a half, some of the stuff we have coming over the next year and a half, is about accelerating that process behind the scenes. And so when you talk about the volunteers, they are amazing, but they need work, right? Meaning they need help. And so I'm at every one of these meetings, and I'm working with staff to get, one of the biggest challenges has been getting staff, senior staff. And I say this only because it's been successful. So I'm happy to report senior staff is buying into this, but is to buy in to this, to say, hey guys, we're part-time elected officials. We're calling all these people in. So prior to my administration, there was maybe 50 volunteers scattered throughout the town. We now have over 200. And so that's a big volunteer corps to manage. And a lot, again, if you want to have some productivity, if you want those people's opinions to matter, you have to have a system that's capable of processing those opinions. So it's as much the boring stuff behind the scenes. I mean, when I say I'm a government nerd, the administrator has flowcharts on his desk that I make at like 11 o'clock at night when I got nothing else to do about, and like, yeah, right. And it's like, and I've been doing that since I was 16 years old. Like that has been a hobby of mine. So when and by the way, I spent my fair time, too much time in the bars, but when I wasn't, this is what I would do always. This is just something I've always had a passion for. So I love it.
That's awesome. So what are the biggest challenges? You mentioned offshore wind. Maybe we should spend a little bit of time talking about that. I will say I was out maybe 3 weeks ago. We were heading north, and I saw that machine, that thing that is driving, the New York Bight, which is like the last one that we needed, right? Seems like everything south has been stopped, but to see this 500-foot crane, and I'm, 50 miles away from it, and I see this thing, and I've got pictures of the actual like stanchions that are coming in, the numbered stanchions from this New York wind project that's going to be off a Long Branch. And so if I'm, 15 miles outside the Manasquan Inlet and I'm seeing this, what's going on? What's the latest there?
Yeah. So the latest is very murky, is what I'll say, because the Trump administration had kind of made it pretty clear that they wanted to halt this. And that was like a campaign promise and something that everyone, including myself, was expecting to come down the pike. In some forms, what I'm hearing is that has happened, that some of the funding has been cut off. But then I've also, when I say I've heard, I'm talking about reliable sources, not necessarily just random people, but it is hard to get official information as to what's going on. But what I've also heard is that the funding for the existing transference, the cables, which is the thing that we were most concerned about, is still in place. Because to your point, what they're saying is that, hey, there may be a day when we have this offshore wind. So they're basically talking about the idea that there could be these trenches put in with cables that aren't used, that maybe one day will be used. So that's what I'm hearing. I have to believe that the monetary end of this is going to collapse. It almost had prior. The subsidies needed to be massively increased, and they weren't. So that's one thing the Trump administration didn't do, right? So I tend to think, I don't want to take anybody off their guard because I'm opposed to offshore wind, and I could go on and on about why that is, and I've written about why that is. But stay vigilant, right? And I will too. But I tend to think that this thing is going to die on the vine. It's just going to take some time.
What did that look like? I mean, so they were going to come through the Army camp and they were going to go up. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were going to come. So the idea was the project was to get the transmission of somewhere on the magnitude of 10 times Oyster Creek nuclear power plant. I can't remember the megawattage off the top of my head, but I remember that. Just as a side note, I'm only smiling because it's just it's disturbing sometimes. But we had a woman come to the council meeting who I'm now friendly with, and she says at her first night, they're going to run something that's 10 times the Oyster Creek nuclear output. And this is very, very early on, and I had not heard that before. And I literally thought to myself, there's no way. Like, this woman has to be mistaken. And so in that BPU call that I just referenced earlier, that was my first real question. After they said, all right, we'll figure out a way to get down there. I said, now let me ask you a question. I had a woman at the council meeting the other night, and I said, 10 times. Is that right? And there's like a scientist guy in one of the corners, and he's like, well, Mayor, and he says, megawatts and all this stuff, and he says, it's like 8.8. It's like, oh, wow. Okay, so yeah, like 10 times. Okay. So, but the point is they want to transmit that amount of power from the landing station at Secret Army Camp, which, let's be clear, the reason it was selected is because The Army camp is owned by the state of New Jersey, so they're not going to object to their own plan. Sure. Had it been any other town, that would have stopped them right there in court, but they get to do that because it's their land. So that's the landing spot, and then it's Laramie, I think is the name of it. It's something like that in Howell. They have a name for this station, the substation out in Howell. So they need to get the power from the Atlantic Ocean to this landing pad in Seagirt, and then underground cables all the way to Howell. I will say this. After the presentation that BPU brought, and I was educated, this type of first of all, let's be clear, this type of operation has done nowhere. Nowhere in the United States is this amount of power transmitted underground. It does not happen. And that's another reason why I think it's unlikely to go forward. So, but I will say this, they educated me a lot about the difference between DC power and AC power, and this is DC power. It is a lot less concerning to me, nonetheless. What I mean by that is, if they were, and I said this to BPU, you guys say that there's 1/4 of that transmitted all over the country, so do that. Right. To me, I was like, that's so simple, then don't multiply it by 4. Yeah. But, we'll see.
Well, you talk about, and you may have noticed I've been pretty quiet about this. I'm not a very political person, so I'm kind of just taking this in. But you talk about them potentially running the cable but not using it. Mm. To me, that seems like a tremendous amount of money that they could eventually just turn around and say, well, it's already there, we may as well use it.
Well, but that requires a tremendous amount of money to use it, because if they don't build the windmills, they can't use it. And right now, there's a really big question mark over the economic viability of building these windmills, because they require so much government subsidies in order to make sense. So these companies that are investing in these windmills, which, by the way, are the fossil fuel companies, that's my favorite part of this whole story, they're all owned by the big oil and gas companies. So there's all one and the same. And the point is, the only reason that they are diverting their interest to this market is because of government subsidies. So if those are in any way altered, this whole thing falls apart. And, you can end up in a situation where, and this is one of the reasons I'm opposed, my wife's family is partially kind of from the Netherlands. It's a long story, but they are were, and somewhat still are, heavily reliant on wind for their energy grid. I go over there every couple of years and I check in on the situation firsthand. And they are a victim of the problem that I'm worried about occurring here, which is that the subsidies occur for installation but not maintenance. And so these companies who have the incentive to put them in, now granted, they do have to generate a certain amount of power to achieve subsidies going forward, so some of them have to work. But there's no interest in them maintaining 100% of them working. There's actually a business interest in doing the opposite, right? Letting a few of them just go if it's too expensive to repair. So you end up with these windmills that are just there,
800 feet in the air,
right?
Not moving,
and they're just there.
Yeah.
And so like when you talk to someone who's even pro wind, and you ask that question, most of them can't even provide the answer. When you say, why is that one windmill spinning and the other one is not? The answer is the lack of repair subsidies, right? So it goes back to, ironically or not, what I was talking about, why I left politics, because this is the definition of what government does wrong. And so to your point, why would they build those things and not use them? I actually think as crazy as it sounds, there's a real possibility that could happen, because the special interests involved with funding the dig are still there, and they don't care whether power goes through it or not, because their contract is to build it, right? So those people, those interested parties are still there. And by the way, one of them is JCP&L itself. They want to bid the transmission they want to do this project. So believe me, there's connections, and that's a quasi-public agency. So don't even get me started on whether or not they should even be allowed to bid on something like that. But
yeah, we had a little bit of history with them and running power through town.
Sure.
Yeah.
So on a large level, it's just a money grab.
Oh, yeah, 100%. From the beginning.
But you have to also look at the tourism impact. So last summer, Nantucket.
Sorry, I am glazing over the awful impacts. I went right to the politics. I went right to the politics, but the awful impacts are awful.
Yeah, I mean, the bird kills. They're not doing any sonar studies anymore, and suddenly there's much less marine death. They never made that correlation versus connection type of thing. But Nantucket last year, I mean, they lost how many weeks of their beach season because they had one windmill break and all the fiberglass kept showing up on the beach. Nobody could swim. Mm-hmm. So we don't want this. We do not want that off of Long Branch.
Well, and I was going to answer the wind. We kind of went deep on wind, but I was going to, when you said, we'll talk about wind, I said, well, I can put in a bucket of issues was going to be my response, because the state's response, the state of New Jersey, to a whole host of issues facing the state, I feel like our primary purpose at this moment is to survive the end of the Murphy administration. I genuinely mean that. I mean that from a non-political, just objective standpoint that Manasquan's needs to survive until the end of this year without major changes from the Murphy administration, because his to-do list is shocking. And the short-sightedness with which the policies are presented, so I'm going to just tick them off.
Yeah.
You got offshore wind. You got base flood elevation. So base flood elevation, for those who don't know, means that he wants to raise the threshold for what we consider to be properties that can flood 4 feet. Now, it was 5 feet last year. Yeah. They're all proud of themselves because they consider themselves reasonable now.
And what's that based off of? That great study from
Well, okay, I'm sorry. You're correct. There's a study that they're basing it off of. I'm sorry.
Garbage study. I'm giving you a lot of credit.
So you got base flood elevation, and you have affordable housing. So you have these 3 issues that are essentially what people of our age and older will know as an unfunded state mandate, right? Those are words that are popular from the 90s and early 2000s. A state mandate that doesn't come with any money and doesn't come with any assistance. In this case, it's not the money so much, but it's the mandate part. And in all 3 cases, and believe me, like I said to you guys, I know some of the people who are putting these policies together, and let's just say, we're almost not. Some of us are not in speaking terms anymore because of my advocacy against these policies.
Which I have to say, you are a Democrat.
I am.
Yeah,
I am.
And you've stood up against these.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole long story as to how and why I'm a Democrat. That mostly, actually, I'll give you the super short version. When I told you my grandmother was here, she moved down from Jersey City. Well, it was Sayreville, but she was from Jersey City. My grandmother was a ward Democrat in Jersey City, so they had when you turn 18, they literally walk you down to Borough Hall and sign you up as a Democrat. And my grandmother, I was the only grandkid she did that with because I had this interest in politics. But she's like, we're doing that, and so that was that. But anyway, my criticism of the administration is not political, and that's what I've said to the administration staff, and that's what I've said to some of the candidates running for governor too. And I have some more conversations coming up with some of them in the next few weeks. And I'm saying the same thing. I'm not changing my tone. These policies are bad. They're bad policies. They're bad for the state. They're bad for the people they impact. And there's smarter ways. So I'll give you an example on base flood elevation real quick. I referenced the Netherlands, the Port of Rotterdam. You can take a look at it. They have expanded the footprint of the Port of Rotterdam. They're so proud of it. They're on their 3rd expansion project over the last 20 years or something like that. And they're expanding double-digit percentages of their property, their land value, into the ocean.
Sure.
And our answer is everybody back up? You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
We're the United States.
Who's that ultimately paying? Is it the insurance companies because they can just drop the policies? What's the motivation? Why do you think that is?
I mean, look, I think it's an oversimplified. This is what I've said. Look, regardless of causes and everything else, we have seen more severe storms. We have seen changes in the climate in terms of what the impact that we're seeing in terms of flooding and that kind of stuff, which we can deal with on a local level. But when you talk about these catastrophic events, which is what we're talking about, right? The reason to raise things 4 feet is for a Sandy. Yeah. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So the question of who pays for that, ultimately it's the taxpayer, ultimately. And when I say the taxpayer, I'm talking about the people of the United States, because so much of that money comes directly from FEMA, or at least used to. We'll see how the next one goes. But the idea is, right, people in Iowa pay for us to rebuild because we pay for people in Iowa to rebuild. Right? It's not a hurricane, it's a tornado. Or it's a river that overflows its banks. That was the deal. And so I don't understand that. First of all, it's worth mentioning that we are experiencing this base flood elevation by choice. No other state is going through this, and this is a federal program. This is entirely a Murphy wish list. That's all this is. And I'm not howling at the moon. I know these people. This is what this is. Because the reason Delaware and New York and Florida are not going through this is because FEMA hasn't made a change. And I don't know if the Murphy administration has noticed, but Donald Trump is president of the United States. Right. So what is being first in the nation to change our base flood elevation doing?
Yeah, it's virtue signaling. I mean, it's nothing. Yeah.
But virtue signaling, how about this? Unlike all these other states, New Jersey funds most of its government through property taxes. Now, ask yourself this. Don't just think of the ocean, right? You have rivers, lakes.
Yep.
Waterfront property is the most expensive property in the state. So the primary result of this policy will be to devalue the people who pay the most taxes towards this greater system. It's just insane. And again, it's the wrong answer. There's a federal program to put floodgates at all the inlets. That's how you deal with
What's
this.
the story with that?
They canceled it.
They canceled it.
That was the Biden administration, by the way.
Okay.
Because precisely, again, it's why I ran screaming. Special interests killed that because they want us to have this fight about all this other stuff. There's so many people making so much money off of this. All of this. I mean, because remember, you raise something 4 feet across the board in the state of New Jersey. You could say you're opposed to it if you're an architect or you're an engineer or you're a planning attorney, but there's gonna be a boom to you because now you have to redesign everything.
Yeah,
you have to figure out a new way to build everything.
And really, what it is, it penalizes people that are trying to build a new house, and a lot of people come in this town are septuagenarians or higher. So now you're telling these 70-year-old people, hey, guess what? Get another flight of stairs even before you hit your first floor. Everybody else gets a little bit grandfathered in. But yeah, it's
but the impact on flood insurance could be dramatic.
100%, or you may not be able to get
right,
it,
or
you cannot get a mortgage if you don't have the flood
exactly,
insurance.
which means that you're affecting young couple, or,
Yes.
young families, whatever. So it's a nightmare scenario. I will say this. I say with a smile on my face, the the constituencies of the towns that I just named are not without power. And I want anyone listening to this to remember that and know that elected officials from all of these towns, that's how it got killed the first time. When it was 5 feet and they put it in a drawer and said, forget it. And then it came back and now it's 4 feet. I don't want to be overconfident, but I'm an optimist. I think we can kill this thing and I think we can kill it again. Well, so we just need to do it.
Tell me more about that because, in the state legislature, we're nothing, right? I mean, you're a Democrat mayor in a Republican district.
Yeah, it helps.
Yeah, but it's not the state legislature. It's you and the mayors in your coalition that are actually speaking up against this. It's not the state legislature.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. No, I mean, so the legislature only does what's in its own self-interest. And again, that's a lesson I learned a long time ago. So at the moment, serving the governor is in their interest. And that is a whole bunch of reasons why that's true. We could do a whole podcast on the politics of politics. But right now it's in their interest to serve the governor. I will say this. The governor hasn't done this yet. The way that this works functionally is that the legislature does nothing, then DEP can implement this change. So the governor is essentially saying he's going to do this. The reason he hasn't just done it yet is because there's been a threat behind the scenes by the legislature, by the Republicans and Democrats, a bipartisan group, because again, this spans communities across the board, who said that they will overturn this if he does it. So even if he does it, and again, this is where I say with a smile on my face because I remember my old days, if the Democratic administration wants to pass this before the election, they can pretty much guarantee a Republican victory, I would think, which means it won't be policy. And if they wait till after the election, these towns will go nuts in a way that I don't think they're prepared for. And I think the legislature will have no choice but to overturn it.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're saying you could do it as a lame duck thing.
Yeah.
And so what do they do though at that point?
So again, the legislature of 2026 could certainly overturn that. And again, I think that would. Let's put it this way: I wouldn't do anything else until that happened, and I think there's a lot of mayors who would say the same thing. So that's the kind of thing where if the governor really did pull the trigger on it, we're going to DEFCON 1 immediately. So
Well, you talk about having to wait out this administration, and fortunately, we don't have all that much time to wait. Do you have any idea if somebody like Mikie Sherrill is on board with these ideas?
So I don't want to speak for the Congresswoman. First of all, it's worth mentioning that I endorsed her in the primary, and that's because I am still a registered Democrat and I'm a mayor, so I get asked these things, and I don't shy away from them because I think that it's important. And I thought that the Congresswoman, I'll speak openly about this, that my endorsement considerations were limited to her and Congressman Gottheimer. Because they're both moderates in the Democratic Party, and that's the closest I can get to with most of, so ideologically, federally, statewide, they don't seem to be too far to the left. I'll just be straight up about that. But I will say, and I have said this, and I have to find a way to say this to her. I worry that she's under, or her people, or a combination of both, are under measuring the moment, and instead looking at pure politics, because the pure politics of this is she's likely to win. If she keeps her head down, doesn't make mistakes, New Jersey tends to go the opposite way of the presidency the next year. They like the balance, the check on the president, especially Trump when he says some stuff. It's fires up a Democratic base. So I think she's certainly a likely winner here, and I think she knows that. So I don't see them upsetting the apple cart really in any way, and that includes the Murphy administration, right? Because they're in the same party. So I don't see a ton of room for her in the current system to really do anything about that. But I'm always hopeful that one day there's going to be someone in office who turns out to be kind of like me and is actually doing this for the right reasons and understands how this works and has the guts, because you need both. You need the brains to understand how this works, but more importantly, the guts and the ability to make people understand and see that there's a better way to do this. And yeah. So it's going to take
for
a lot.
me, again, who doesn't really understand or know much about politics, to me it seems like somebody like yourself who's unwilling to necessarily, quote unquote, toe the party line doesn't get that far because they're outspoken.
For sure.
Okay.
And I know that, and I played the game for a long time, right? And so, again, it's one of the reasons I left professional politics. Again, I'm really glad that I had the experience so that it informs my service in Manasquan. But for the most part, and this goes back to what we were talking about people not doing politics for their lives, I don't talk about this stuff. We've gotten way, way deeper than I get in 99% of my conversations, including with my wife, who doesn't even want to get this deep on stuff. Because people just want to live their lives and they want to know why the street isn't paved, or they want to know, well, in these examples, they want to know why the state is doing this and what we can do to stop them. And the shorthand is we're doing everything we can to stop them. Because the reality is, once there's a time for people to either go to a protest or write a letter, we will reach out. In the meantime, that's my job. My job and other elected officials' job is to fight on your behalf. And so that's what I do. I mean, I have meetings, I have conversations, I talk to people all the time, and so do other mayors, and I talk to them. So we're working hard to try and stop this stuff. And the last one is affordable housing.
Yeah. Maybe we should talk about, I don't know, affordable housing or the Glimmer Glass Bridge. Either of those are.
Well, the Glimmer Glass Bridge is a really brief one because so there's a guy. I'm not going to name him because he's not an elected official. He's an employee. But there's an employee of the county who works in the engineering department who's just a great guy. And he's a really smart engineer. And he's been with the county, I want to say 35 years or something. And he told us about 5 years ago that he will not retire until that bridge is replaced. And he's getting older. So, I mean, I love him. He's a great guy. So we are scheduled to have that bridge replaced. So that's why I just want to say that the county is supposedly going to be replacing that within the next 5 years. Where we may need public pushback, and the county has been receptive or has reacted to this in the past, is that we're not sure that they're planning on building a temporary bridge, and we very much think they should, so that we can keep vehicular traffic, because it's going to be 2 years of construction. Right now, the county plans call for that bridge to be in the open, or essentially the roadway to be closed for 2 years. So we want to see if there's a way that they can build a temporary bridge.
Or a ferry or something.
A temporary bridge would be great, but honestly, having it closed for 2 years isn't much different than it is right now.
Well, that's the comment of the neighbors, to be honest, for most of them, yeah.
Well, you and I were on that Zoom call, I forget what it was, with the historical. That was the biggest holdup, right? That was the last holdup. And, we've been talking about this for a long time. The county, people are like, oh, it's such a beautiful bridge. And the county came up with a plan that looked exactly like the bridge, except for it was wider.
Yeah.
Wider,
and that's the plan that they're going with.
Yeah.
And I hope faster.
No, well, they're going as fast
I want
as they
it
can.
just as slow for the nostalgic purpose.
Yeah.
So 2 years would be tough. But I mean, our Uncle Donnie, for 10 years ago, was a county bridge inspector and told my aunt, never drive over that bridge with your windows up. Be ready to go.
So I will say, just as a matter of public safety, that it is okay to drive over. But I have seen I've seen the deterioration of it firsthand over the years. So that's the bridge update. I don't know how deep or how wide you want to go with affordable housing, because it's a huge issue. and there's a lot going on in Brielle, and I'm very informed as to what's going on in Brielle and Wall and Manasquan. I talked about the experiences I have. I have the unique experience of the affordable housing in New Jersey. Super brief history. The Mount Laurel decision, which is what people refer to when they talk about affordable housing. I actually forget what that was now, but it was, I don't know, 40 years ago or something like that.
It was right after World War II.
Oh no, was it early 70s?
Well, I
don't even
there was
remember.
5 of them at this point. Mount Laurel 1. I've got Casey and I have a lot of research on this. I don't remember the exact year.
So it doesn't matter. But
Mount Laurel originally started developing after World War II.
Yeah.
And all right, go ahead. I'll interject.
Well, that's okay, because you're going on the history of what precipitated the ruling. I was going to just start at the ruling.
Yeah.
The ruling, I don't remember what it was, but it was important. I think the ruling that I'm referring to happened about 40 to 50 years ago, because we have 40 years of affordable housing history in the current era. Yeah. And what it said was, this is the key phrase, municipalities in New Jersey have an affirmative obligation to provide affordable housing. That changed forever the landscape.
And can I tell you, that's a very expansionist interpretation of the New Jersey State Constitution and the General Welfare Clause of Section 8 in the United States Constitution. Like, that was New Jersey basically saying that the state had this God-given mandate, an unfunded mandate, to actually ensure this, right?
Yeah. So couldn't agree more. And what I think, regardless of, and see, again, this goes back to the special interests and the issues with politics in New Jersey, is what's required is a constitutional amendment at this point, because the highest court in the state, to your point, a way activist ruling, totally inappropriate, but the only way around that at this point is a constitutional amendment. And what I say to people is, well, but see, this is the problem, Casey, because I see you shake your head, and this is what kills me about politics, and this is why I can't play the bigger game. Because every single solitary member of the legislature knows that needs to happen. Every single one of them. And they're not going to do it. So, at the end of the day, a constitutional amendment is really not that big of a deal. It's a piece of paper. It would take them a couple months through process to get that done. And everybody could agree and has agreed. Do you know why they haven't done it? Because no one wants to touch it. The fact that it was taken by the courts, and then ultimately now, very recently, the legislature finally jumped back in. But they're not trying to solve it, because there's special interests that are out there that are telling them in the legislature that the best way to do this is to force towns to do it.
Yeah, probably some of the builders that are getting...
Of course.
Yeah.
So there's an organization that fights for developers' rights, essentially, in this situation, and they go around the state and they challenge municipalities to build more housing, and they are funded directly by,
I have to imagine it's also not a good look for a legislator to try and be the person who's stopping affordable housing.
Well, so it depends on the district, right? And that's the issue, but the way that the maps are drawn. So that's a whole other issue. But I think that when it comes to affordable housing, the key mistake that was made in that decision was saying that it was municipalities who have this obligation. You can make an argument all day about whether or not the state has an obligation to provide affordable housing. I don't care really if they have that debate or they don't, but they probably should, I guess. But the point is, if they decide they have that obligation, then provide the housing.
Yeah, provide some funding for it, and maybe look at the fact that some municipalities are built out a little bit more than 100
the
County.
Craziest thing to me was so we got kind of off track here because I want to so how my history got involved here. So for the last 30 years, the state of New Jersey has done this in 10-year increments. You get a 10-year certification. So just because of my timing, I was elected 2 certifications ago. So this is my 3rd time through this process. So even though I've been doing this just shy of 20 years, it times out that I've done 30 years worth of affordable housing stuff. And what I've seen is that in the first round was the best way, if you're going to have this program, which I don't think you should. But if you're going to, they used to have these things called regional contribution agreements, RCAs. And what it was a town like Manasquan would be assessed its affordable housing obligation, say, okay, based on your population, you should provide X amount of affordable housing. But since you're fully built out and you don't have room to build all this housing, we will allow you to use the developer fees that you collect, which, by the way, I hate that. They say developer fees. Homeowners mostly pay these fees. It's when you do anything to your house substantial, you pay a COA fee. That goes into an account that the town can't touch for anything but it. And what you used to be able to do was give that money to a town or a city that wanted to build affordable housing. And I thought that was a perfectly acceptable, I should say acceptable. It was not desirable. But if you're going to do this, I thought at least that made the most sense because
it's kind of like the mob, like you.
No, but I was saying at least you're getting
contributions,
housing where you want it.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem, right? We're putting this housing in places where it doesn't belong. And we're putting tons of strain on local infrastructure, whether it's water, sewer, transportation, whereas cities have capabilities of dealing with higher density. Wall Township, for example, right? They were assessed almost up to the I forget what the limit is. They put a limit into how much assessed affordable housing you have. It's like 20% of your population or something. And Wall's like right there with their newest obligation. So what they're saying is they want you to expand the population of your town by 20%. That's insane.
And no additional funding for your schools or your utilities
or water, like sewer. Yeah, I mean, we have a water plant. We pump our own water in Manasquan. So does Brielle. Like, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
So it's a nightmare. It requires a constitutional amendment. I will say this: Manasquan has fared very well in this process in terms of minimal impact, minimal damage, minimal change to the face of the community. I'm confident that when we do our fourth round negotiation right now, which is what we're doing, that'll be the same. That we'll have two projects that'll both be on 71. I think they will improve the individual parcels that they're on, and I think they will not adversely affect the community, the character of the community. Then you look at what some other towns are being forced to do. It's important to note, and I'll just say this for you guys, any government nerds want to follow this. Manasquan, even though we're in the newspaper at the same time for some of this affordable housing stuff as the towns around us, Manasquan is 10 years ahead of everybody else. You have to read the fine print. This is our fourth round obligation. These other towns are satisfying their third round obligation, which is from 10 years ago. And let me just say as a general statement, I dealt with this issue proactively in Manasquan. I say it was us as a team, but I was very much advocating of saying, engage in this process or you're going to get killed. And sure enough, 10 years later, I'm proven right. Because in Manasquan, all we had to do to satisfy our obligation was build the property on 71 10 years ago and Broad Street, which went through without objection from the neighbors, without official objection in the end, because we catered to all the stuff that they wanted and they were happy. And in the end, it all worked out.
And you built in a flood zone, which is not great.
Not great.
Yeah.
But my point is, I think the same thing is going to happen this time where Manasquan will certify itself again without dramatically upsetting. Nobody wants to do this, but if you have to, we're doing it with the minimal impact. That's by being proactive. And a lot of the towns around us decided to put, and look, this was for political reasons too, let's be honest. I was willing to look at it because I was able to sit across from some of these people as a registered Democrat you brought up, traditionally, quote unquote, pro affordable housing, right? That was the old mantra. And so I had entree into this conversation in a way where I felt comfortable. Most of these Republicans who surrounded the town didn't have any degree of comfort in having this conversation. They said, yeah, take us to court. Screw it. We're just going to put our heads in the sand. So I don't blame them for that approach. I kind of understand the instinct, but they are paying the price.
Yeah.
And maybe they hope that something would change in the meantime, right? That maybe someone would come to their friggin' senses and change this nightmare of a system, but it hasn't happened yet.
No, I mean, prior to the builder's remedy, really getting teeth, I think they were right, right? Go ahead, try us. And that kind of held off for a while. That builder's remedy is pretty powerful.
It's a big deal. And for people who don't understand what that means is, and I just simplify it, a judge tells you, you're going to put affordable housing here and it's going to be at this density. You don't have anything to say about it.
Yeah.
And again, Manasquan has not only avoided that fate, we're not even close. That's not even a concern of mine. We may have to have some tough negotiations, and believe me, I've had them. But it's one of my favorite parts of the job, actually. I love negotiating on behalf of the taxpayer when there's nothing at stake for me. It's fun.
Yeah.
Because I enjoy getting a win on behalf of people who don't even know what I'm doing. I know that sounds but it is. I love that stuff.
Well, tell me about the overlay zones and how that factors in.
So overlay zones the idea is that there's an area where you have increased density. So if your normal density, they tend to talk about this stuff in units per acre, which is really, really hard to convert in people's minds for the size properties that we have here. So trying to think of a good way to do this, but Route 71 was 5 units per acre. The overlay zone makes it 10 units per acre. So it's double the density. And that was something that was negotiated in during the third round. We have no new overlay zones proposed for the fourth round in Manasquan. And I will say this. How do I say this? The third round overlay zone that was in place in Route 71 yielded no affordable housing. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
So even though it's in place, it was never used. Because I know some people have said, well, why did you do that? And
it's there.
It is there.
And it's an incentive, potentially.
But it has never, well, yeah. Yeah. So that's the idea.
Yeah.
All these topics you're bringing up, whether it's the windmill generated power, whether it's the flood zones, whether it's the affordable housing, I think they're all such hot button topics because the biggest fear of Manasquan residents is change, right? We have something so special here, and everybody is just terrified that one day we're just not going to have it anymore.
Yeah. And I've had to, a big part of my job as mayor has been, I think, filtering, or maybe, I don't know what the right word is, converting that fear into a mindset that can be sustainable at Borough Hall and among the council and the staff. And the councils are very much on board with this, and we've talked about it, about setting a tone, about being sensitive to that. Because what we believe is that you can make meaningful transformational change in some cases and still not cross that line of changing the town. And I think that is, first of all, my detractors from day one would have told you that was my stated goal, right? Was to change everything in Manasquan, and they don't realize that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm a well-traveled adult, and I find that to be insulting, to be honest, because the idea that I would run to be mayor of this town just to change it is, like, to me, insane on its face. And I said this, I think, at the last year's Mayor's Ball. I forget what speech I said this in, but the job, it turns out, I said that it was at the Mayor's Ball, but this is a true story. A guy said to me, "Hey, you're doing a great job." And I said, "Thanks." I said, and he says, I forget how he said, keep up the good work. I said, well, the job is, oh no, he goes, Manasquan's a great town. You're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. And I said, Manasquan's always been a great town. The job is to keep it that way. And that's harder said than done because things fall apart over time. See, right? So Sea-Watch, for example, when I was a kid, was operational. And then all of a sudden it wasn't operational when Sandy hit. And there was a huge chunk of the community who didn't want us to rebuild that. And to me, preserving the past and honoring that feeling of I don't want things to change is about taking action. I've said this before. Everybody knows this instinctively. If you don't want something to change, I understand the instinct to do nothing, right? To leave it alone. But we all know that if you do that, actually, the only thing that's going to happen is the thing's going to fall apart. And so to preserve something, you have to act. You have to do something to preserve something. And so that's the basic premise of what we do. And so, like, you look at First Avenue, right? The repaving project, Sea-Watch. You look at, we're going to be doing Stockton Lake Park, Curtis Park. Curtis Park's a great example. All these things that we do that are meant to foster that sense of community that you don't get anywhere else. And yeah, there's some people who misread that, to be clear. And I'm always empathetic to them who say, well, look at what you did at Curtis Park. Believe me, I have people who say, look at what you did, you changed it. And I have neighbors, I'm not kidding, who have said to me, you made every one of my fears come true. That it's used 7 days a week. I can't get any peace because it's a park that's used all the time. So there's a flip side to some of this stuff. And now we work with these neighbors to try and mitigate whatever problems we can, but we never apologize for the overall idea, which is that, hey, sir, ma'am, I grew up right around the corner from here. I played at this park. You better believe if I'm the mayor, my kids are going to play at this park. And their kids are going to be able to play at this park. Like, that's the idea. So if we didn't rebuild that park, and that's what I said to him, I go, so what do we do? What do we just get rid of the playground when it's, and by the way, right, we have people say, yeah, that's exactly what we want you to do. So that's part of the challenge, is converting that pain and that fear to a sense of pride about what we're trying to do to keep it. And I will say this, I mean, I don't know, it's my first term, so we'll see, but I think the majority of the community is responding to that. I think people get that. I think that most people see that that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's the like the ramp and like the assimilation factor, right? So like a couple people move to town, they bring their own ideals of what a town should be. You have this like historical like maybe you should like take a beat and like learn about the town. You've had to deal with COVID and like a massive influx and change. So like when you bring that many people in, that's got to be a challenge to try to keep that what we have going, and like get that assimilation curve down to the point where we keep Manasquan or Brielle
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I'm slightly uncomfortable talking about this because it's the most self-centered part of, I think, what I'm going to say here. But I do view my role, my place in the timeline of our lives as unique. I am from here, but I'm only 41, and my kids are, you guys know, 12, 10, and 7. The perspective that I have from that positioning of having been both the longest serving and still the youngest elected official, having these relationships with new Manasquan or old Manasquan. And I do use these terms, by the way, because I think it's important to give voice to how people feel. And they feel like there are those two. And when I give remarks and I talk about old new Manasquan or whatever, new Manasquan loves that I bring that up because it makes them feel welcome. And I've talked to them about this. And so my point is, like, you got to bring everybody together. And I view my role, or not my role, I feel like it feels weird to me to say that it's luck or whatever it is, but like I just feel like I'm in the right place at the right time for the town because of just who I am, just the biography that I have and the experiences that I've had. Like I said, I have a company based out of New York, and I've been here and I do it in flip flops, because that's where I was born. So it's like,
Do you think there's a limit though? Like, you're very welcoming, but do you think there's a point where someone's like, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't have the candy cane hunt"? That's
so fierce in defense of our traditions would describe me. I'm not going to, but there's any number of stories that I could give as to why I keep doing this. Because every now and then something comes up and I realize that if I wasn't there, I don't know who would have advocated to keep whatever. Or, perfect example. I will give an example. The Thanksgiving Day Parade. We were a whisper away from losing that because it had been run by the Big Blue Boosters. And like a lot of volunteer organizations, they had kind of waned in their strength and basically decided that they couldn't do it. There was no other organization capable of taking this over. No volunteer organization was willing to do it. It was too big of a thing and they couldn't figure it out. And I remember when I heard, they came to me and I said, and this was, I think it was either 2018 or 2019. It was right pre-pandemic. And at that point, we were about 4 years into the new recreation department that I helped spearhead to bring paid staff to recreation, again, to preserve the small town charm. If we're losing volunteers, this is what I said to everybody, if we're losing volunteers, your argument is what? Let all these programs go away so that my kid doesn't have soccer or whatever? Right. Like, no, the people are still here. And that was borne out by the use. So we took a recreation program that was $40,000 in revenue in 2016 and now has over $600,000 in revenue, paid staff, and it returns money to the taxpayers every year. But we built that program when the parade went away. We were able to swoop in, and people don't even know this happened, but now recreation runs that parade.
And old Manasquan's like, everything just kept going on as normal.
They have no idea that it was the investment, the change, which I heard nonstop criticism from old Manasquan. Why are you paying recreation? We had volunteers in our day. We don't need to pay people. And I go, it's a different time. Yeah. And so if you want to have this stuff, you need paid staff. And that's just one of 50 examples that I could give you of that type of investment saving something critical to old Manasquan.
Wow. So. No, that's great. That's great stuff. So you mentioned AYF, and so that's going on right now. That's been a change. I mean, it was for forever, right? It was
Pop Warner.
Yeah. And Manasquan football being a thing, Thanksgiving versus Wall, but just Manasquan being a powerhouse. So both of you guys, since you're involved in it, tell me a little bit about AYF, where that came in. It's different.
Yeah, well, I mean, the history of it's related. Most people wouldn't have, again, this perspective, but I was, Vic Caboose water boy when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah. And I told you guys, my mom was a single mom, and she was single. My dad was in my life, but he lived, and so she was involved. She always volunteered at the school for like basketball games and stuff to make extra money, and so I was always around because she didn't have anywhere else for me to go. And they were like, come on over to the football team. And they kind of put their arms around me.
Which, by the way, Vic was great. I was, in Bridgewater. Vic was like, if you want to use a weight room in the summer, like it was always open to that.
Yeah, and just a little twist of fate. Again, timing to me is just amazing. Our borough administrator left earlier this year, and I had just kind of a coincidence that a guy named Rich Reed had come back he was on the council for a term, but he'd come back to be the assistant to the mayor and council. I asked him, or well, he offered, and it was like, wow, this is great. He just happened to be there, and so he's now the borough administrator, which is the most important position for people who don't know. That's the person who really runs the town government, is the administrator.
Who was that, Carol?
No, right now it's Rich Reed.
Oh, Rich before. Yeah.
Oh, before that it was Tom Flaherty.
Okay.
But my point is, there is a picture of a 9-year-old me, 8-year-old, something like that, with a 23-year-old assistant coach, Rich Reed, to Vic Caboo. So I have known him that long, and he has known Manasquan that long. And yet he's the kind of guy, too, who, like me, wants to aggressively pursue these things to make the investments and the changes we need to preserve the town. So, like, just having that, there's a football connection is my point. There's always a football connection. And so the history of Pop Warner and the history of AYF somewhat mirrors a lot of the changes in Manasquan. Pop Warner was run by quote-unquote old Manasquan. And AYF is a blend of old and new. And that's what it makes it great, in my opinion, is you had Bobby Malone and a bunch of other guys, some of whom are new to the area, partner up with guys like Jay Price and Bruce Bresnahan and others who are obviously, been here a while, and made this thing. And I just think it's really cool. I think it's fantastic. And I want to give a special shout out to our new president, though, Matt Kokoda, who is also the principal of the high school.
Used to live on Agnes Avenue here in Brielle.
And now he lives on my street.
Yeah.
We're neighbors now. So, yeah. But, Casey, what do you think of AYF?
Well, I didn't have any experience with Pop Warner, and I did not play football in high school or beforehand because I was a soccer player. But I absolutely love the sport of football. In terms of coaching, I could never do it. I'm the guy who makes sure that everybody gets their mandatory plays. That's
but I hear
my
you're
job.
very good at it.
I'm so good at knowing when people have hit 10 plays.
Believe it or not, that's harder than you think, and Casey does do a good job. He even comes to practice to make sure that he knows the kids.
Rec basketball, awesome. He's pulling it, and he pulls his son more than, he's the first one off. Like, sorry, Jack, still on the bench.
Optics.
Yes.
No, but listen, I don't care what it is. If it has something to do with Manasquan, I want to be involved. I don't know that much about coaching football. I do know a lot about football, but coaching football, I know nothing. But I want to be involved. Anything that has to do with my kids, anything that has to do with the town. So I think AYF is just a blast. I mean, it's a huge time commitment, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big ask to get the kids off the beach in like late July, early August. You guys are
but these kids want to do it.
Yeah,
right?
they do.
I mean, Finn has been so into it that he was weight training at Brielle Sports Club for 5 months prior to football season. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how much he cares about wanting to play. Does he love surfing and going on the beach? Sure. Does he sometimes roll his eyes when, practice comes around? Yes. But he's also there 10 minutes earlier than he needs to be, which is 15 minutes early, right?
A lot of them.
Yeah.
Tom
These
Coughlin.
kids, I'll be driving home from work, and I will pass the field, and there'll be kids there half hour, 35 minutes before, the 15 minutes early that they have.
Casey, how about tonight? They stayed after.
Yeah.
We had 2 hours of practice, and they're staying, kicking around soccer balls and hanging out with each other and doing. I mean, it was unbelievable. These kids love being there. They like being together. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And for us, coaching, it's me, Derek Hughes, Mike Mangan, Chris, I don't know.
Chris White. And Billy. Coach Billy Elias.
And Lloyd Nolan. And
Lloyd.
All of us except for Billy Elias, who's from Times River, who's the head coach, we've all known each other forever now. And so it's really fun for us to just be together and doing this.
It seems like they have a lot of safety protocols. Like, it's a little bit different than when we were kids, right?
Listen, when I was a kid,
a little different.
I feel like the generational difference is almost equal to that and my father, right? When I was a kid, he would talk about how,
no water.
And just the one bar across, they just had literally the one bar across the face mask. So that generational change to what they have today with the helmet safety,
Guardian caps, Q collars,
everything.
Does everybody play with Guardian cap? Is that
yeah. Well, they practice with them.
Okay.
But I will say this, and again, I urge anyone who has a question about it to come to a practice and watch. And that was what I was encouraged to do in the beginning. I don't know whether I did or didn't, but it certainly made the point. because these kids are taught how to hit differently than we were. The drills are different than when we were kids. There's just not the same level of intensity, and there's a sensitivity to the head that never existed before. So we tackle differently, and we teach the kids that. The kids are sensitive to it too, so like they know. So I just think the awareness has completely changed the sport in a good way.
Yeah, I think that's like a good question. Like, do you teach them young or do you wait till high school? But if they've grown up like learning how to hit properly versus just being muscular and being able to just lead with the head, spear tackle.
I think like everybody has to make their own decision, obviously. Yeah. But what I'll say for my family was it's their level of interest. So Will wanted to play when he was, I think 9 is when he started. But Matt is 10 and he doesn't want to play yet. So, and he may not. I don't know. We'll see. Right. But I will say this to anybody who's like concerned or questioning it. The younger they get, just to put it bluntly, the less hard they hit. Watching the young ones hit is those fears can dissipate really quickly when you see what's going on.
Yeah, I think the real issue with the younger people or the younger kids like Jack, who's 10 years old, I don't have him playing AYF football, not because I'm worried about his safety. It's because I don't want to listen to him complain about five practices a week right in the middle of summer.
It's a lot. It's a lot for them.
Yeah, it's a huge commitment. And like, what are the times? I mean, like I see like high school, they're up at 5:30 in the morning, but like these kids are mostly in the afternoon.
I mean, the weekends, like Saturday, practice starts at 10. It goes to 11:30, and then it's Monday through Thursday, 6 to 8:30.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot. I mean, and all the coaches work full time, but like to Casey's point, these kids show up early and they stay late. They love it. And their love of it has made me like this has been. I was not prepared. I did not have time for this, but we needed a line coach, and I promised I committed to that last year. It's I jokingly but truthfully say it's the only thing I'm qualified to do in all of sports. But they need a line coach, and I'm happy to help. And
and that's why it was so important for people like Bobby Malone, Jay Price, and the guys that keep it going to have started this because our kids were all playing for Wall. And Bobby's.
That's why mine wasn't playing.
Yeah, mine did play for Wall. And the only thing he said during the whole season was, Dad, I just want to play with my friends. Mm-hmm. I don't know these kids. I want to play with my friends. And Bobby Malone recognized that. His kids were playing for Wall, too. And
because Pop Warner had kind of like folded at that point, right?
Yeah. And he basically said, all of you kids are going to be playing in high school against the kids you're on the team with now. What are we doing? Let's get you playing with your friends and the kids you're going to be playing with in high school.
What's the slogan? The next generation of the Big Blue Line?
The long line. But I do really think that this is just, and there's so many stories of this where this reinvestment and blending of new Manasquan and old Manasquan revives something old, makes it new, but it looks different. And so, it is different. The one I get is, well, but AYF is by age and Pop Warner is by weight. And how do you feel about that? And I go through the explanation and I'm like, I don't think it's a big deal at all. But, there is that initial, especially people who knew Pop Warner are like, well, it's not as good. It's by age. I'm like, it's great. Everything's fine.
I don't know. If I have a bigger 10-year-old, I don't want him playing with 14-year-olds.
And listen, the other thing is the freedom is there when you do it by age to move your kid around. They can play up if they're big. And, when you have weight, like I was, when I was in 8th grade, I was constantly battling on the weight because I was a lineman, so I was a big kid, and I was right up against the limit. So like I was like one of those kids who had to run around the block in a black garbage bag, right before weigh-in.
Yeah.
So don't advise that, by the way.
No, not healthy. All right, Mike, we've got a long time. I do have one last question. It's about this ballot measure that's coming up in the fall around open spaces, and maybe we can talk about that. Brian Burgess wants to come on the podcast. We're telling him by at least 2027 he's right here, but no, maybe
28.
Yeah, maybe 28.
Well, you be careful though, because I've appointed Brian to like 12 commissions, so he's got a lot of information.
So what is this new tax, and what's the intention behind it?
So the open space tax, in brief, in 2001, Manasquan passed the open space tax referendum, and at the time, the stated purpose was to purchase the Sea-Watch property. It was owned by the Mullers. It was $6 million, even back then. And they bought it with grant money that helped partially pay the down payment. And then the balance of it was funded through this open space referendum. So at the time, it was the lowest available rate, essentially, which was a half a penny. That's how they do this on $100 worth of valuation of your house. It's a super complicated formula to make it really hard to tell what you pay in property taxes that we've been doing for like 100 years. You think they would change that, but they don't. So anyway, half a penny. And what that means is over the last 21 years, 23 years, about pretty much 100% of that money went to purchase Sea-Watch debt. So it was a 20-year note in 01 or 22. I forget how it ended up later. I think we deferred during Sandy. So it was like 22 that it got paid off. And it was paid off. And so it wasn't until 23 that this fund, which right now generates around $90,000 to $100,000 a year, so that's what a half a penny generates for the town, became kind of available. I told you I've been doing this 20 years. It was never a thing. It didn't matter because the money came in and it went right to the Sea-Watch debt service. So when it came available, I was like, wow, this is interesting because the money's used for recreation, it's used for improvements, it's used for open space preservation. There's a list of a few things it's used for. And so when I started to do research on our fund, what I found was 31 towns in Monmouth County have an open space tax. We are the lowest, the absolute lowest. Some of the more conservative towns that you'd be surprised to think that they have really high taxes, like Colts Neck and Homedale, because of the high property values, right? They need a lot of money if you want to preserve land in Colts Neck or in Homedale, right? And so what I realized was that, combined with the fact that Seagirt, Spring Lake, a lot of these other towns, I would get challenged by things with people going, how come they can build a pickleball court and we can't? And that kind of stuff. And I, again, just looked at it because we have a very good flat structural budget. I was like, yeah, where are they getting this money from? And I went and did some research, right? And I found out most of it's from the Open Space Fund. They have much bigger open space funds than us. And then when you combine that with what I said about high property values, it just made sense to me that for the 2025 version of this conversation, we should be at the county average, which is 2.5 pennies. So yes, I recognize that's 5 times the current rate, and that's a lot. I recognize that. But I also have been around long enough to realize that these referendums don't come up often. You usually tend to only get one bite at this apple. And if we want to make generational, impactful change going forward, the town needs a reasonable fund. I mean, let's be clear, even quintupling that fund only brings in about $500,000 a year. So in real dollars, now, however, because we can borrow, we can leverage that $500,000 for quite a bit more in a situation where we feel like we need to.
Like, give us some examples of like what that might be for us.
So let's start with a simple one. Manasquan Inline Hockey, another volunteer organization that has fallen by the wayside, but there is still very much an active hockey community in the area. So there's been a concept of redoing the hockey rink down there and then redoing the skate park, making it smaller and for beginners, which is kind of what it was meant for. But then the pieces got mismatched and it's very expensive to redo that. And then add 5 outdoor pickleball courts. And so you'd have to reorient the road. It would be a very expensive project, but like that's one that normally we would have to go out for tons of grant money for and may not happen for another 4 or 5 years.
Right.
But if we pass the Open Space Fund, we could do that next year. And again, not use up the whole fund. We would just take a portion of that, bond it out, and that kind of thing. Another example, developers. So we have the ability to offset development through use of this fund. So we have a redevelopment zone on Route 71, for example. We have, a couple of situations that have come up. Some of them practical, some of them not. But when you see like a 5-lot subdivision, you could see a world where we use this fund to offset some of those properties and try and reduce density. I don't promise a specific property on that. There's some ones that immediately come to mind, but we don't have the money for that, so it's not even a conversation we can have. But generally speaking, it will help with improving recreation facilities, public facilities, and maintenance for those. But it'll also allow the town to look at strategic properties. Oh, let me give you one example because we do have a list of these properties. Paul Gleitz, who's the Monmouth County Open Space guy, this is one of the commissions I revived, the Open Space Committee. So they meet monthly and they're like doing tons of great work on this to put together this huge report on all this stuff. So they actually have lists. This will be part of the public campaign that's going to be going forward, is to educate people. I'll have the newsletter going out on this about what these eligible properties are. But I'll give you one example. There's a property adjacent to a town-owned property on Atlantic Avenue that, if purchased, would allow for much easier bike path travel from the bike path to the high school, which is a major problem. Yeah. So something like that would be a perfect example of what you would use that open space fund to help purchase. It's not necessarily that it'll be open space, quote unquote, but it's used to take a parcel off the map and use it for public purposes.
All right, and so the major opposition is just, it seems on paper, 5x increase, but like, is there anything else that people are opposed to?
No, I think that honestly, I have not heard a ton of opposition. I've heard question, right? I hear people say, why? I've not heard anybody say, you're crazy. I've had people say, why are you doing that? And I explain it and I say, we're just asking you to go to the county average. So we just want to be kind of in the middle of the pack. And we think with Manasquan's property values, going less than the county average just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so that's the argument that I give. And I think we have any number of good uses that fund can go for.
I do have one question for Mike.
it.
Mike, what would you say to a guy who lives in Brielle but has a Manasquan license plate? A license plate that reads SQUAN, but
Let
lives
me
in
just
Brielle.
say that has come up in private conversations, and I'll leave them in private conversations, okay?
It's bad luck.
It's not. Look,
Here's what I said. It just proves how awesome Manasquan is. It just does. I mean, Manasquan. Look, I love Brielle. Don't get me wrong. And by the way, I'm friendly with a lot of your elected officials because they're good people who care about this town. I'd be happy to get some of them on here, by the way, for you. They're good people, and I know that they're going through a lot, and it's challenging for them. They're trying to see their way through a forest, and especially as it relates to affordable housing. The cards that they're being dealt in a lot of ways were dealt 10 years ago. So it's a very difficult situation for the current people to handle.
100%. I talked to Frank last week. He's definitely interested in coming on.
Good.
Put in a good word.
I will. And
course.
I will.
But yeah, you hit that on the head. Like there is a lot that was not done for a while that now we're going to have to absorb. But hey, Mike, this was awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
this was
you
a lot
so
of fun.
much for going this
Be
long.
happy to come back.
Yeah,
Anytime.
definitely. Open invitation. You are always welcome. We're going to close out here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't you wanna know what it's like to live a good life?